Come, let us explore the best mindfulness advice you've never received. This morning's lesson is drawn from a good-hearted question found on Reddit. What does it mean to not put judgments on your thoughts? I try to focus on breathing and focus my attention on my breath. But I always hear to not put judgment on your thoughts. What does judgment sound like? So I applaud the enthusiasm of the person asking this question and their composition skills. You'd be surprised what what I normally have to read. So well done, you. So there's a lot to unravel here. So let's do a quick overview. We're going to focus on we're going to explore the idea of focusing on breathing and see how that correlates to judgment on thoughts. And the correlation might create an aha moment for you. So let us begin with broad brushstrokes. Sturgeon's law reminds us that 90% of everything sucks, but not in the fun, tingly way. Well, in what way then? Well, 90% of humans suck, and including 90% of meditation teachers, because instead of following the Buddha, they are following the Buddha's foolish cousin Devadatta. They might not even know it, but they are. How? How were they doing that? Because like Devadatta, like the opposite of the Buddha, like the yang to the Buddha's yin, they fully embrace and even promote being rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel. Instead of, like the Buddha, being flexible, loving, rational, laid back, egalitarian, lucid, cooperative, and kind. But what's so bad about being rigid? What's so bad about being controlling? Let's answer the question by gazing through the lens of neuroscience. If the authors or teachers upon whom you rely advise you to actively analyze or actively focus on anything, including your breath, the only way to do that is to rely on discrete neurological mechanisms, such as those found in either our medial prefrontal cortex or our dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Now, our prefrontal cortex is pretty astonishing. If you want to compare, contrast, sort, calculate, analyze, cognate, reason, or edit, this is the part of the brain that's going to serve you remarkably well. But it's kind of like a Stradivarius. It's vulnerable. And once it's overworked, the amygdala is triggered. This lumpy thing here that kind of looks like a pea is the seat of aggression and anxiety. And when it is triggered, it multiplies our controlling and rigid tendencies, which are going to feed our tendencies to strive to control our experience. Now, I'm forever grateful to the great Tibetan saint, Dzal Paltrul Rinpoche Jigme Choki Wangpo, who taught that the fundamental duality of Buddhism is not self and others, it's pushing and pulling. And so when we are in the thrall of rigidity and controlling tendencies, we want to control our experience. I don't want to control that, but I do want to, I'm sorry, I don't want to experience that, but I do want to experience that. Or perhaps I should rephrase it. I don't want to experience this, but I do want to experience that. I'm trying to infer an idea of distance. So that is very common. And in many, many, many meditation manuals, penned by those who are proudly patriarchal, rigid, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel, superstitious as well, they delight in picking and choosing and pushing and pulling. Is there another way? Is there a portion of our central nervous system that is suited for the Buddha's yin approach? Yes. Yes, there is. You see, my friends, every time that we inhale, whether we know it or not, we are wired to effortlessly and automatically access our sympathetic nervous system, found in the middle third of our spinal cord. This sympathetic nervous system is wired to help us to perceive vulnerably, passively, viscerally, randomly, and fleetingly. And so can you see how these attributes have nothing to do with yang and everything to do with yin? Nothing to do with pseudo-spiritual patriarchy, and everything to do with spiritual matriarchy? And so, the most efficient way to practice mindfulness is to silently, mentally, and passively recite the demonstrative pronoun this during each inhalation. Doing so helps the clown car of our brain to actually cooperate with our sympathetic nervous system. Now, every time we exhale, whether we know it or not, we are wired to access our parasympathetic nervous system, which is found in both the lower third as well as the upper third of that same spinal cord. This parasympathetic nervous system is wired to support both physical relaxation as well as mental release. So, yes, during our inhalation, we are wired to notice sights, sounds, sensations, flavors, scents, and the like, including emotions, intentions, thoughts, memories, and imaginings. During our exhalation, we're wired to physically relax and mentally release. The seventh enlightenment factor is equanimity, taking a balanced approach. What does that mean? Well, it means if we're on the playground and we're climbing on a seesaw, we're standing right over the fulcrum. We're not running to one end or the other. So how do we do that with our meditating? Whatever comes up, we apply the exact same response. What's that? To perceive and release, to practice mindfulness and meditation. So regardless of what comes up, whether we are perceiving the external or the internal, we notice and release. Whether we are perceiving the physical or the mental, we notice and release. Whether we are perceiving the painful or the pleasurable, we notice and release in harmony with our coordination with our inhalation and exhalation. Whether we perceive the boring or the interesting, we notice and release. Whether we are perceiving the grotesque or the glorious, we notice and release. And because we forge the habit in meditation of making this ease our go-to response. I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but the most efficient way to practice meditation is to silently, mentally, and passively recite the one-syllable verb ease during each exhalation. So this ease is not only the key to a successful practice of mindfulness and meditation, but it is the key that unlocks the prison door, or the door to the prison of our duality. Now, we're going to have knee-jerk reactions. We're going to have emotional responses to things that come up. What's going to be so when we feel disgust, what do we do with disgust? You got it. We notice it and release it. So for instance, I have a bunch of disabilities, and I'm able to hide them most of the time, but the more tired I get, the more unpleasant my thoughts become. And so unpleasant thoughts become like a red flag. It's like, oh, I need to rest. So if I'm super tired and I start reliving an adolescent anger fantasy towards my father, my job is not to cuss out that fantasy or my brain. My job is not to reason with myself. My job is simple. Notice and release. Notice and release. That's the path. Ironically, the noticing and releasing of mindfulness and meditation numerically constitute 25% of the Buddha's Eightfold Path. And yet, if we make this our sole practice, we will spontaneously generate the remainder of the Eightfold Path. Check this out. Do you remember how we discussed that when we overuse our prefrontal cortex, it excites our anxious and aggressive amygdala? Well, practicing mindfulness and meditation in harmony with our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems first sedates our amygdala, second stimulates our anterior cingulate gyrus, which functions as the hub of our mirror neurons, the seat of empathy and compassion and love. When we persist with this, we will find that our choices, utterances, and deeds flow with the effortless effort, which is the sixth fold of the Buddha's Eightfold Path. We will find that our choices, utterances, and deeds flow with the effortless effort of love's centered spontaneity. You see, it has been taught that the highest love is spontaneous and uncontrived. It is not the product of active concentration or active analysis, for those things excite our anxiety and aggression. I think you would agree, aggression is pretty much the opposite of empathy. Yes? Of course, yes. But when we persist with mindfulness and meditation, this is a fringe benefit. Our anterior cingulate gyrus, the seat of empathy, becomes more robust. And that is why it is taught that the highest love is spontaneous and uncontrived. That is why in the first meditation manual there is no mention of either selflessness or empathy, because they are not required. By simply practicing the techniques found in the Buddha's first meditation manual, those experiences take place spontaneously. And according to the Buddha, the key to no self, the key to emptiness, was simply impermanence. Not experienced through blind faith, not experienced through pseudo-intellectual reasoning, but experienced viscerally. Because you can try to not perceive impermanence, but you will fail. We can't help but notice change. It's wired into our survival. We are wired to survive. And part of survival is responding to an ever-changing environment, be that environment circumstantial or physical or interpersonal or mental. So by cooperating with our autonomic nervous system, we cannot help but notice changes. Changes in that which we see and hear and feel and taste and smell. Changes in that in our emotions, intentions, thoughts, memories, and imaginings. And so, simply by practicing awareness and release, we cannot help but master the entirety of the Buddha's Eightfold Path. This need not take forever. This need not take an eternity. According to the penultimate passage of the Satipatthana Sutta, we can master the Buddha's path in less than 7 years, or 7 quarters, or 7 months, or 7 fortnights, or 7 weeks, or even 7 days. If you begin practicing for 5 minutes every 12 hours your first week, if by the second week you progressed perhaps to 10 minutes every 12 hours, if by the third week you progressed to 15 minutes every 12 hours, by the conclusion of the 16th week, you could be completely comfortable with the practice of sitting during one of my lessons and 60-minute group practices that comprise the majority of my live streams, which are free and found on YouTube every 12 hours, whether live or taped, preserved, thanks to the auspices of YouTube and Google. You can do this deal. You can do this deal in less than the third of a year. You can do this in a handful of months. I think it could be great fun if together as a team we did a bit of chanting and a bit of meditating after approximately 30 seconds of housekeeping. This is Lama Jigme Gyatso of the Buddha Joy Meditation School. For more than 30 years, I've spent about 8 hours a day, almost every day, studying, practicing, mastering, and reverse engineering the teachings and techniques of each school of meditation so that you would not have to. Welcome, my friends, to Meditate Like a Jedi, which is made possible due to the generosity of viewers just like you. So I think it could be great fun if together as a team we played with the latest iteration of love, mindfulness, meditation, and the 3 marks of reality. And that kind of sounds like a 1960s Motown group, doesn't it? Let us begin by Let us set intention by chanting love and releases wishes for universal enlightenment and well-being. Together. May all circumstances of all beings appearing yet impermanent be as safe and abundant as a real or imagined Buddha's land. May all minds of all beings clear yet impermanent be as joyfully enlightened as a real or imagined Buddha's mind. May all relationships of all beings resounding yet impermanent be as peacefully loving as a real or imagined Buddha's speech. May all bodies of all beings sensual yet impermanent be as beautifully healthy as a real or imagined Buddha's form. This morning, let us bring the circumstantial into the path of love, mindfulness, meditation, and the 3 marks of existence. So this morning we're going to start by bringing the Dhamma, circumstantial, into the path of dukkha, stress, which is the first of 3 marks of reality. So together as a team, please chant with me. Each of us has experienced the stress of not getting all circumstantial needs met. How we want when we want for as long as we want, if at all. So let's take all these words and squish them down into just 6 syllables, which we can divide between our inhalation and our exhalation. Of course, we're using the noun lot as a monosyllabic synonym for circumstances. And please remember, this question is rhetorical. So now that we have metaphorically taken our cerebral caffeine and have woken up and have activated things, now let's implement what we practiced during the lesson. Let us silently, mentally, and passively recite this as we inhale and ease as we exhale, thus facilitating the perception and release of mindfulness and meditation. Now, since this is going to be our first collection of 144 breaths, I think it can be rather useful to simply take the great knuckle at the base of our right index finger and gently rest it upon the tip of our left index finger, resting both our hands in our lap, palms up. Now you might ask, hey, how am I supposed to count 144 breaths on just 8 fingers and 2 thumbs? Well, we're going to break it down into 12 sets of 12 reps. But we're still faced with the question, how do we count 12 reps on just 4 fingers and 1 thumb? This is how. Remember how we mentioned that during the inhalation, we're going to silently, mentally, passively recite the demonstrative pronoun this? As we do that, we can advance the tip of our right thumb upon the creases of our fingers, beginning with the little finger, moving towards the index finger. Please practice with me. Well, we've counted one set of 12 rounds. How are we going to count 12 more? Simple. By using the creases on the fingers of our left hand. Beginning this time with our index finger, moving towards our little finger. Let's continue. I'll be right back. We now come to the second quarter of this morning's practice, where we bring the Dhamma circumstantial into the path of Meta's loving kindness. Please chant with me. Since we are not alone in our frustrations, we could also long that other circumstantial needs also be met. And now we prepare for our second collection of 144 breaths, wherein we simply bring the great knuckle at the base of our right middle finger gingerly to rest upon the tip of our left middle finger, with such that both our hands are palms up in our lap. We've come now to the third quarter of this morning's practice, where we take a quick break and from our meditation to do some passive contemplation, where we bring the Dhamma circumstantial into the path of anicca impermanence, which is the second mark of Tilakkhana reality. Please chant with me. Observing the coming and going of circumstantial phenomena, help us to see that ever-changing one and all there is nothing permanent to grasp. So what we're going to do is take all these words and squeeze them down into just 6 syllables that we're going to divide between our inhalation and our exhalation. Of course, please remember this question is purely rhetorical. So, whoopsie, let's hit this button here. So now let us return to our primary practice of bringing whatever we spontaneously notice into the path of awareness and release. So to keep track of this, our third collection of 144 breaths, what we can do is quite simply find the great knuckle at the base of our right ring finger and gently rest it upon the tip of our left ring finger, resting both our hands palms up in our lap. And so to collect 144 breaths, really we must collect 12 sets of 12 breaths. How do we count 12 breaths on just 4 fingers and 1 thumb? Simply, as I've already mentioned, the most efficient way to practice meditation is to silently, mentally, and passively recite the 1-syllable verb ease during our exhalation. And the most efficient way to practice mindfulness is to silently, mentally, and passively recite the demonstrative pronoun this during our inhalation, while simultaneously advancing the tip of our right thumb to the creases of our fingers. There's 3 sets of creases on 4 fingers for a total of 12. Let's begin with our little finger. Well, that was our first set of 12 repetitions. Now, how do we count an additional sets? We do that on our left hand. First set, second set, third set, and the like. We come now to the fourth and final quarter of this morning's practice. Let us bring the Dhamma circumstantial into the path of anatta, no self, or not self, which is the third mark of Tilakkhana reality. As we relax into our exhalation, whatever circumstantial phenomena we notice during our previous inhalation could feel less like our identity, as if it simply did not define us. So we're going to take all these words, compress them down into just 6 syllables that we're going to divide between our inhalation and our exhalation. Now let us bring whatever we spontaneously notice into the path of awareness and release. Since this is our fourth quarter, our fourth collection, I should say, of 144 breaths, let us keep track of that. With the great knuckle at the base of our right little finger, by gingerly resting it upon the tip of our left little finger, and then resting both these hands palms up in our lap. If you just joined in, allow me to remind you. The most efficient way to practice mindfulness is to silently, mentally, and passively recite the demonstrative pronoun this during our inhalation, thus helping us to notice, vulnerably, passively, viscerally, randomly, and fleetingly, whatever comes up, whether that which comes up is a perception, an emotion, an intention, a thought, a memory, or an imagining. The most efficient way to practice meditation, however, is to silently, mentally, and passively recite the one-syllable verb ease during each exhalation to facilitate both physical relaxation as well as mental release. Let us seal this morning's practice by chanting love and releases wishes for universal enlightenment and well-being. May also, so by the way, these are not prayers. We're merely using words to guide our own intention. May all circumstances of all beings appearing yet impermanent be as safe and abundant as a real or imagined Buddha's land. May all minds of all beings yet impermanent be as joyfully enlightened as a real or imagined Buddha's mind. May all relationships of all beings resounding yet impermanent be as peacefully loving as a real or imagined Buddha's speech. May all bodies of all beings sensual yet impermanent be as beautifully healthy as a real or imagined Buddha's form. If you feel that I have earned it, you could give this live stream a thumbs up. You could even help support this channel. In approximately 10 hours or so, I would very much like to return to lead today's evening meditation class and group practice. And if you are as geeky as me, may the Force be with you always.